There's a kind of tiredness that comes not from doubt, but from years of doing the right thing, and quietly wondering whether doing it was ever the point. Not doubt in the way you'd confess it. Not a crisis. Something quieter than that, and in some ways harder to name. The feeling that a life built on conviction, on faith, on showing up, on doing what you were supposed to do, might have been built on something you never actually examined. And the unsettling part isn't the behavior. The behavior was real. The faithfulness was real. What's unsettling is the question underneath all of it. What exactly was I doing it for? Immanuel Kant, the philosopher your college-educated grandchild might casually refer to as the man who ended the argument for God, wrote one sentence that I think is the most clarifying thing ever put on paper about this feeling. One sentence that answers the question underneath all the others, and I'm going to give it to you in the first few minutes of this video, not at the end, because the sentence isn't the trick. Understanding what it costs is. Kant opens the groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals, his foundational work on ethics, written when he was 60 years old, with this: "It is impossible to think of anything at all in the world, or indeed even beyond it, that could be considered good without limitation except a good will." That's the whole thing. That's his opening move, not a preamble, not a warm-up. This is the first claim he makes, and it is one of the most deliberately radical sentences in the history of philosophy. Notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say the good will is the most good thing. He doesn't say it's very important. He says it's impossible to think of anything else in the world or beyond it that qualifies as good without limitation. The word he uses is impossible. There is no exception clause. There is no except in cases of genuine religious conviction, or except when love is the motive. The only thing that survives the test is the good will, and that raises an immediate question. What doesn't survive? Kant is specific. He goes through the list. Intelligence, the capacity to think clearly, to reason well, to analyze and persuade, not unconditionally good. A sharp mind in the service of a corrupt purpose is not good. It's dangerous. Courage, the quality that preachers celebrate, that monuments commemorate, that parents try to instill, not unconditionally good. Courage without moral direction is what makes a criminal effective. Self-control, the discipline to resist temptation, to maintain habit, to live by routine, not unconditionally good. Kant says this quietly but clearly. The calm, measured person who uses those qualities in the wrong direction becomes not merely harmful, but more abhorrent for having them. The coolness of a villain, he writes, makes him not only far more dangerous but also immediately more abhorrent to us. The discipline is real, the moral worth is absent. Then Kant reaches the things that might feel more personal. Wealth, power, health, honor, not unconditionally good. Any of these in the wrong hands, or directed by the wrong will, produces outcomes that no one would call good. And then he says the one that lands hardest for a person who has spent a life trying to build it, happiness, not unconditionally good. A rational being who uses happiness, good fortune, and contentment without a good will directing them, produces nothing of moral worth in the having of it. The happiness was real. The comfort was real. The prosperity was real. But happiness is not, in itself, the thing. Now, and this is where the video earns your time, Kant does not say these things have no value. Intelligence is valuable. Courage is valuable. Happiness is worth wanting. He's making a precise philosophical distinction. There is a difference between something that is good and something that is unconditionally good. A knife is good for cutting. A sharp mind is good for solving problems. These things have what he calls conditional value. They're good when they're directed well. The good will is the only thing that holds its value in every possible condition, under every possible circumstance, without exception. This is not an abstract observation, it's a diagnostic. Because if you apply this test to the things that a person might build a life around, not bad things, not immoral things, but the things a faithful, church-going, morally serious person in America has been told to value, most of them don't survive it. Think about what it would mean if a person attended church every Sunday of their adult life, not because their will had chosen it, but because it was what their family did, what their community expected, what felt safer than not attending. The behavior is identical to the person who attends from genuine moral commitment. The external output is the same, but for Kant, the moral worth is entirely different. Not because the person is a hypocrite, not because they're consciously performing, but because the source of the action is compliance rather than will. And here is where I want to be precise about what I'm doing. Kant was not a Christian theologian. He was not commenting on church attendance. The bridge I'm building here, from his concept to your Sunday morning, is my reading, not his claim. What Kant actually describes is what he calls mere legality. Acting in accordance with the moral law while not acting from it. You do the right thing, but you do it because of external pressure, fear, expectation, habit, or even the warm feeling of belonging. He contrasts this with moral worth, which requires that the action be chosen freely by a will that recognizes the moral law and acts because of it. The translation to the Christian experience of faith is the narrator's, not Kant's. But follow the principle, and here's where it lands. There is a faith that is chosen, examined, and owned, and there is a faith that is inherited, performed, and maintained. Both can produce the same external behaviors, but they are not the same thing. And the person who arrives at the end of a long life with a creeping suspicion that their faith might have been more performance than will, that suspicion is not weakness. It is not betrayal. It may, in fact, be the beginning of the kind of faith that Kant's framework would recognize as morally serious. This distinction between performing faith and willing it is also not unique to Kant. C.S. Lewis, who is nobody's idea of a threat to Christianity, makes a parallel argument in Mere Christianity. Lewis distinguishes between doing kind acts and being a kind person, between performing the external behaviors of a good character and actually becoming one. He argues, in his own idiom, that what matters ultimately is what you are becoming, not what you are producing. Kant's formulation is more precise, but the structure is nearly identical. The man you were told is the enemy of faith, and the man most conservative Christians would trust with their lives arrive from completely different directions at the same point. Kant didn't build that bridge. Lewis didn't read Kant and say, yes, that's my point. But the convergence is real, and it matters, because it means the insight isn't a secular trick. It's a description of something that serious moral thinkers, working from entirely different foundations, keep bumping into. Now, you're somewhere in the middle of this video, and you've just had Kant strip the unconditional goodness from intelligence, courage, happiness, good fortune, and the performance of faith. And the question that's probably forming is the one I want you to hold for the next few minutes. If all of that fails the test, what does a lifetime of quiet faithfulness actually amount to? Before I answer that, I want to tell you something about Kant himself. He was raised in a pietist household in Königsberg, a form of Protestant Christianity that placed enormous emphasis on sincere inward faith over ritual and outward performance. His mother, Anna Regina, died when he was 13. He wrote about her later in life with a warmth that was unusual for him, a man not given to sentiment, saying that she had a heart open to all that was good, that she planted and nurtured in him the first germ of the good. She had no philosophical education. She had never read Aristotle or Plato or Descartes. But in the judgment of the man who would spend 40 years trying to identify what unconditional moral goodness actually is, she had it. A woman who never read the Groundwork. A woman who lived in an ordinary household, in a provincial city, in a life without monuments. The man who wrote that intelligence, courage, happiness, and good fortune are not unconditionally good looked back at his mother's life and saw the thing that survived his own test. I am not telling you what Kant concluded about his mother's theology. He didn't say her faith saved her in any doctrinal sense, and I won't put those words in his mouth. What I am saying, and this is the narrator's reading, flagged as such, is that the human example Kant chose to point toward genuine goodness was a pietist woman who practiced sincere, unspectacular faith without philosophical vocabulary and without public recognition. She did not perform it. She willed it. Now let me close the loop I opened at the beginning of this video. You were told, or perhaps you absorbed it from the culture, or from a particular reading of the Enlightenment, that Kant is the philosopher who made faith unreasonable, that he dismantled the traditional arguments for God's existence and left religion with nothing to stand on. That's not wrong as a description of what he did to certain philosophical arguments, but it is deeply wrong as a description of what he left behind. Kant wrote, late in his life, and this is verified from the Critique of Pure Reason, that he found it necessary to deny knowledge in order to make room for faith. He wasn't destroying faith, he was relocating it. He was saying, The arguments that tried to prove God from observation or logic were always on shaky ground, and they still are. But that doesn't touch the moral reality, the experience of obligation, the awareness of a law that operates inside you independently of reward or punishment. He couldn't prove God from a telescope, but he couldn't explain the moral law inside him without something like God either. This is not Kant becoming a Christian. He was not. I am not going to flatten the complexity of his position or pretend the hard parts aren't there. But this is a man who spent his entire philosophical life circling the same question this channel exists to ask. What is it, exactly, that makes a human life genuinely good? And his answer, the one he came back to, the one he wrote first, before any of the arguments, before any of the proofs, before any of the 3 critiques, was the good will. The will that chooses what is right because reason recognizes it as right. Not because someone is watching, not because a community expects it, not because it produces good feelings or social reward or even eternal benefit. Because the moral law, the law inside you, the one that has been there since before you had words for it, demands it. Here is what that means for you, the life you have lived. Not the applause-seeking parts of it, not the performance for approval parts of it, but the parts where you did what you knew was right when doing it cost you something, when no one saw it, when the culture mocked it, when even your own children questioned it. Those parts have a name now. Kant spent 60 years finding the right word. The word is will. Not talent, not habit, not instinct, will. The free, rational, deliberate choosing of the right thing because you recognized it as right. That is the only thing in the universe Kant was willing to call unconditionally good. And if the life you've built contains real examples of it, and I suspect you know whether it does, then you didn't just go through motions. You were building the only thing that survives the test. This is not easy to hear for the first time. It's not comfort in the soft sense. It's something harder, the kind of recognition that reorganizes what you thought you knew. Because it means the second half of your life is not an epilogue. It's the chapter where the will, clarified by everything that came before it, can operate with the least confusion and the most freedom. Not the chapter where you earned your rest. The chapter where you finally know what you're doing and why. The question that remains, and I'll leave it with you because it deserves more than this video, is not whether you were faithful. It's whether the faithfulness was willed. Most of us, looking honestly at a long life, find the answer is sometimes. And the Kant who wrote that the good will is the only unconditional good did not mean that as a condemnation. He meant it as a North Star. You now have the concept. If you want 12 specific arguments built on this foundation, ready to use when your adult children or grandchildren challenge the values you've spent a lifetime holding, I've put together a guide called the Argument Toolkit. It's 12 Kant-based responses to the challenges your family is most likely to throw at your convictions. Not debate tricks. Honest philosophical lines of reasoning, written for real conversations at real tables. You'll find it in the description below and in the pinned comment. Before you go, one question worth sitting with. If there's one thing you've believed for decades and held through difficulty, and you've never quite been able to explain why you held it, what is it? Not what the Bible says, not what your pastor said, what you know. Tell me. The word for what you've been doing is will. Kant found it first. But you've been practicing it longer than you know.